Okay, so you want to like really get what's going on in the Jenin Refugee Camp with this IDF operation?
Yeah,
That's a lot.
it's complicated for sure, and
Yeah,
it's tragic. There's a lot of history there,
right,
and we're gonna try to go beyond just like the headlines
right,
and look at all different complexities of it, and
right.
really see how this is impacting like everyday people's lives.
Absolutely. And, it's such a densely populated place.
It is. I mean,
Imagine like tens of thousands of people.
yeah, tens of thousands in like less than half a square kilometer.
Yeah, it's incredibly dense. And that just like adds to this feeling of like,
Sets the stage
yeah.
for volatile.
And, this isn't the first time Jenin has been in the spotlight.
Mhm.
We had a devastating battle in 2002,
Right.
and then the killing of Shireen Abu Akleh in 2022.
Yeah, it's like this place is constantly on edge.
It feels that way.
And so understanding this current IDF operation, what they're calling Iron Wall,
Right,
it kind of requires understanding that history.
right.
It kicked off in January 2025,
Okay.
just days after a ceasefire was reached in Gaza.
So that timing seems pretty significant.
The timing is critical.
Yeah. What's the connection, do you think, between that ceasefire and then the launching of Iron Wall?
Well, the IDF is claiming
Okay.
that during the Gaza conflict, they saw a spike in attempted what they're calling terrorist attacks coming from the West Bank.
Okay.
They say that they stopped over 2,000 of these attempts and neutralized around 800 terrorists.
Wow.
Iron Wall, they say, is about dismantling that militant infrastructure they believe exists in Jenin and stopping those threats before they start.
But what I'm hearing from, Palestinian sources
Right.
is that they see it as almost a form of punishment
Right.
to just like crush any resistance.
Exactly. And the Palestinian Authority's foreign ministry has been really vocal about this,
Right.
accusing Israel of using the ceasefire as cover to just push for annexation of the West Bank.
Hmm.
They believe Iron Wall is one piece of a much larger, strategic move by Israel.
So when we talk about Iron Wall,
Yeah.
what are we actually talking about?
So tactically, we're talking about drone strikes.
Oh, wow.
Ground troops, armored vehicles.
Really?
They're even using bulldozers to demolish homes.
It's awful.
And this is where that human cost becomes impossible to ignore.
Yeah, it's over 25 Palestinians killed, hundreds injured.
It's heartbreaking.
Yeah, and that mass displacement of people, like almost 40,000 people have fled their homes.
Yeah, it's huge.
Refugees in their own land.
And for the people who are still there,
Right.
it's incredibly difficult. I mean, the IDF besieged the Jenin Governmental Hospital.
Wow.
They bulldozed the entrance and the road leading up to it.
Oh my gosh.
So they're essentially cutting off access to healthcare.
That's terrible, especially in such a desperate situation.
Imagine you're in that situation.
Yeah.
You need medical care.
Yeah.
You can't get it.
Right.
On top of that, there are widespread shortages of water, electricity, all the basic necessities.
Yeah, and it makes you wonder what the long-term impact will be
Exactly.
on the people of Jenin,
Right.
of having gone through all of this.
And this Iron Wall operation is not limited to Jenin. They've expanded it to other areas in the West Bank, like Tulkarm,
Wow.
Nablus Tubis.
Okay.
They're claiming they're going after Hamas commanders.
Right.
But again, the displacement and destruction are massive.
So it's escalating.
It is.
And not just in Jenin, but kind of throughout the West Bank.
Yeah, it is.
And I can't help but wonder, are we seeing a repeat of the Gaza conflict here?
It's that fear that's palpable among Palestinians.
Right.
Checkpoints are back up.
Right.
Movement is restricted.
Yeah.
And there's a sense that things are spiraling.
Yeah.
And then you've got these different Palestinian militant groups
Right.
operating in Jenin, the Jenin Brigades, Al-Quds Brigades,
Yeah.
Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigades, even Hamas has a presence there.
What's so striking to me is that a lot of these fighters are so young,
Yeah.
like teenagers, guys in their early 20s.
Yeah, it's almost a generational shift of
Right.
the Palestinian resistance.
Yeah, why are these young men putting their lives on the line?
You have to understand,
Yeah.
Jenin has this long history of resistance.
Right,
Going back to Ottoman and British rule,
right.
there's this legacy of defiance,
Yeah.
almost woven into the fabric of their identity.
It's like it's not just about the current political situation, but a much deeper sense of like injustice.
Exactly. It's deeply rooted.
Yeah.
But there's another layer of complexity here.
Okay.
Jenin Camp is located in an area
Right.
supposedly under the control of the Palestinian Authority.
So even though it's officially under their control, Israel can still conduct these raids.
Yeah.
That seems...
It really undermines the PA's authority
Yeah.
and raises questions about their ability to actually govern their legitimacy in the eyes of their own people.
Yep.
And with Iron Wall, the Israeli defense minister has announced plans for a long-term military presence in Jenin.
Wow.
So a peaceful resolution seems even further out of reach.
It's like a powder keg, and I imagine the international community is watching this really closely.
Of course, you have condemnation from the UN human rights groups,
Right.
governments worldwide, but the question is, are words enough?
Right. Are they actually going to do anything to de-escalate the situation?
Exactly. What concrete actions are being taken?
Yeah.
What's being done to protect the civilians that are caught in the crossfire?
Yeah, those are all big questions and ones that I think we need to dig into.
For sure.
This is already a lot to process.
It is.
It sounds like there's even more layers to uncover.
Absolutely. And that kind of brings us to, like, the role of the international community.
Right. What responsibility do they have?
Yeah.
I mean, we hear these statements of concern, calls for restraint, but is that actually doing anything?
Right. Is that enough? Does it actually change anything on the ground?
Yeah.
It's a huge debate.
Yeah.
Some are saying there needs to be more pressure on Israel to, like, halt the end the occupation, finally allow for a Palestinian state.
Right. Others say the focus should be on rebuilding trust.
Yeah, facilitating dialogue.
Okay.
Maybe mediating between the two sides.
But with that level of, like, animosity, that lack of trust, is dialogue even possible at this point?
Right, and that's why the idea of, like, a neutral third party is so important.
Right.
Someone who can bridge the divide.
Right.
Someone who can help each side at least, like, understand the other's perspective, even if they don't agree with it.
Right.
But then the question becomes, who can actually play that role?
Right, because the U.S. is seen as an ally to Israel.
Yeah.
So a lot of Palestinians view them as biased.
Exactly, and that's fueling the call for, like, a more multilateral approach,
Right.
bringing in the UN, the EU,
Okay.
maybe even regional players like Egypt or Jordan.
So the hope is that, like, a broader coalition would be able to exert more pressure.
Right, and be perceived as more impartial.
Yeah, because it is such a delicate situation.
It's a delicate diplomatic dance.
It is.
But something has to change because the status quo is clearly not working.
Right.
It's leading to more violence, more suffering.
Yeah.
And the longer this goes on, the more entrenched the positions become.
Right.
It's a vicious cycle.
Right.
Almost impossible to break.
And through all of this, it's the people of Jenin,
Right.
the Palestinians, who are really paying the heaviest price.
They are.
They're losing their homes, their loved ones, their sense of security.
And their stories are the ones that we need to hear.
Right.
It's easy to get lost in, like, the political debates,
Right.
the military strategies.
Yeah.
But we can't forget that this is about real people.
Right.
Real lives being shattered.
You mentioned almost 40,000 people being displaced from Jenin.
It's a huge number.
It is. Like, I'm thinking about those families, scattered,
Right.
seeking shelter in mosques,
Right.
struggling to just get by. What is life like for them?
Incredibly difficult.
Yeah.
And you have to remember, many of these families were already living in pretty tough conditions before the operation.
Right.
Jenin Camp, like so many other refugee camps, is overcrowded,
Yeah.
limited access to basic services.
Yeah.
There's widespread poverty and employment.
Yes.
Infrastructure is often lacking.
So this displacement is like another blow to a population that's already so vulnerable?
Exactly. And the psychological impact is huge.
Right.
The trauma of being forced from your home.
Yeah.
The fear, the uncertainty.
Right.
It really takes a toll on your mental and emotional well-being.
And for the people who are eventually able to go back, what are they going back to?
Right.
We've seen the pictures.
Yeah, the destruction, the home was demolished.
Yeah.
It's hard to imagine rebuilding a life amidst that.
Yeah,
It's a monumental challenge.
it is.
Rebuilding not just the physical structures, but also, like, a sense of community, a sense of normalcy.
It just feels almost impossible given everything that's happened.
And that's why addressing the root causes of this conflict is so important.
Right.
The political and economic conditions, the occupation,
Yeah.
the lack of Palestinian agency. As long as those issues remain, the cycle of violence is going to continue.
It's a bleak outlook, but it feels like the truth.
It does.
Like, we can't sugarcoat the reality of what's happening.
And that's where individual voices become so powerful.
Right.
Sharing stories,
Yeah.
raising awareness,
Yeah.
demanding accountability, pushing for change. These actions, however small,
Right.
can contribute to a larger movement for peace and justice.
It's a reminder that even when things feel hopeless,
Yeah,
when the news is just filled with despair, that we can still make a difference.
absolutely.
Every act of courage, every act of compassion has that ripple effect.
It does.
It can inspire others and contribute to a larger wave of change.
It really can.
It's a hopeful thought to hold on to,
Yeah,
especially when faced with, like, the brutal reality of this situation.
it is.
We've talked a lot about the violence, the destruction, the political battles.
Right.
But are there any stories of resilience, of hope that have emerged from Jenin?
Absolutely.
I'd love to hear about that.
And those are the stories that fuel my own hope.
Right.
Even in the darkest of times, you see incredible acts of courage and compassion.
Yeah.
People coming together to support each other, to rebuild what's been lost, to create something new and beautiful out of the rubble.
I need an example. Give me one of these glimmers of hope.
Okay, so there's this group of women in Jenin Camp
Okay.
who started a cooperative bakery.
Okay.
They lost everything in the IDF operation, their homes, their businesses,
Wow.
but they came together, they pooled their resources,
Yeah.
and started this bakery as a way to provide for their families and rebuild their community.
That is incredible. It's a real testament to the human spirit to be able to find a way forward, even when faced with such incredible adversity.
It really is, and it's not just about economic survival.
Right.
These women are creating a space for healing, for connection, for hope.
Yeah.
They're showing the world that the people of Jenin aren't defined by the violence they've endured, but by their resilience and their determination to build a better future.
It's such a powerful story. It makes me wonder, even with this ongoing conflict,
Yeah.
is there still a possibility for peace, for reconciliation, for a future where Israelis and Palestinians can coexist?
That's the future we need to fight for. And we're not talking about some abstract, far-off concept of peace.
Right.
We're talking about tangible changes that can improve people's lives right now.
Like what specifically?
Like ending the occupation.
Okay.
Dismantling the settlements.
Okay.
Ensuring equal rights for all citizens, allowing for freedom of movement.
These are big things.
These aren't just political slogans.
Right.
These are concrete steps that would have a direct positive impact on the lives of ordinary people.
And those are changes that aren't going to happen overnight.
No.
They're going to require a lot of work, it's got a lot of dialogue,
Ah.
a lot of compromise from all sides.
But it is possible, and it's worth fighting for.
It's interesting. We started this conversation talking about a place ravaged by conflict, and somehow we're ending in a note of hope.
That's important because it's easy to give in to despair.
Yeah.
But we have to remember that even in the darkest times, there's always light to be found.
Right.
There's always a chance for a better future. And it's not just Palestinians, searching for that light.
Right.
While doing research for this deep dive, I was really struck by the reactions within Israeli society to Iron Wall.
Okay.
There's a significant portion of the population that's speaking out against it.
Really?
Seeing it as harmful, even counterproductive to Israel's long-term interests.
So it's not a unified front.
It's not.
Even within Israel,
No.
there's active dissent against this operation.
Absolutely. We're seeing huge protests across the country.
Wow.
Hundreds of thousands of Israelis in the streets demanding an end to Iron Wall.
That's incredible what's fueling that. Is it solely about what's happening in Jenin, or is there something more?
Well, Jenin is definitely like a catalyst.
Okay.
But it's also tied to this deeper anxiety about the direction of Israeli society, the government's policies, the very future of their democracy.
So we're seeing both internal and external pressures
Yeah,
kind of coming to a head with Iron Wall as the flashpoint.
it seems that way.
And this debate, this internal struggle within Israel, I mean, that needs to happen.
It does.
Right? Ignoring the problem, pretending the status quo is sustainable.
Right.
That's not a solution.
No, it only prolongs the cycle of violence.
We've unpacked a lot in this deep dive.
We have.
And it's clear that there's so much more to explore.
There always is.
But as we wrap up,
Yeah.
what's one key takeaway? Something that our listeners can hold on to as they try to navigate this incredibly complex situation.
I think the most important thing is to resist that temptation.
Yeah.
To oversimplify.
Right.
This conflict isn't black and white.
Right.
Good versus evil.
Right.
It's messy, it's nuanced, and it requires a willingness to engage with that complexity.
To see the humanity on all sides.
Exactly.
To step outside of our echo chambers.
Yeah.
Question our assumptions.
Absolutely.
Really listen to voices that we might not normally hear.
That's the only way we can even begin to find a path towards a just and lasting peace.
It's a daunting task, no question. But, in the stories of resilience and hope that are coming out of Jenin, even amidst all this devastation, we see the incredible strength of the human spirit.
We do.
And maybe that's the real takeaway.
Yeah.
To never lose sight of that human connection, that shared desire for a better future.
Beautifully put.
And, it's important to remember, this isn't just a story that's happening over there.
Right.
The ripples of this conflict.
They reach all of us globally.
Yeah.
The choices made, the actions taken, they have consequences for everyone.
So stay informed, stay engaged, and most importantly, keep asking questions.
Keep learning.
Because knowledge is power. Understanding this conflict in all of its messy complexities is the first step towards creating a more just and peaceful world.
I agree.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.